201. The Sorting Hat wants to sing death metal. Just a little longer, Anthony said regretfully. We could have seen 2 straight years of Sorting Hat dilemmas. The odds of that are pretty slim, Michael replied at once, but it's been ages. I nearly believed it could happen. Chris stroked his chin, speaking softly. If 2 Sorting Hat dilemmas and they were siblings, I can't even imagine. Applause burst from the Ravenclaw table. Luna, grinning mysteriously, dropped into the seat beside Vizette amid the cheers. The Sorting Hat told me lots of things. About you too. About me? Vizette blinked. Luna leaned closer and lowered her voice. It said you're very special and that it took a lot of effort to sort you back then. As soon as I put it on my head, it wanted me in Ravenclaw, but it was lonely, so it chatted with me a while longer, Luna added. It even asked if tonight's song was any good, said it'd spent the whole year in the headmaster's office thinking up a new song. Vizette couldn't help laughing. The lyrics were fine, but I can't get used to its accent. That's what I told it, Luna said with a laugh. It promised to try a different accent next year, and I taught it about death metal. Death metal. Vizette recalled the tape he and Luna had heard during Christmas shopping last year. A heavy, guttural music with a band playing along. If the Sorting Hat tried to sing that on its own, just raw, hoarse roaring, he couldn't imagine the Great Hall's reaction. A gleam of excitement lit Luna's eyes. So it plans to tell Headmaster Dumbledore and ask him to invite a band to sing the sorting song with it. The sorting ceremony went on. Ginny Weasley, the youngest and only daughter of the Weasley family, was sorted in the usual instant, as tradition dictated, Gryffindor. The final new student took off the hat and hurried toward the Gryffindor table. Professor McGonagall folded her parchment, gathered the sorting hat, and left the Great Hall to announce the next part of the evening. Dumbledore rose to speak. He wore a deep blue brocade robe covered in clover motifs, and his pointed hat had a clover metal decoration. He adjusted his half-moon spectacles and strolled to the front of the dais. The clover patterns on his robe seemed to shimmer as he moved, catching the candlelight. The owl statue unfurled its wings as Dumbledore surveyed the hall and smiled. Welcome back to Hogwarts, all safe and sound. We've had a long day of travel, and I imagine many of you are hungry, so he cut himself off with a twinkle. I won't keep you. Let's enjoy the feast. Short and sweet, as always. Harry and Ron nodded. Harry glanced over to see what Snape was doing and caught his eye. He forced a neutral expression and applauded with Ron, both eager for the first feast of term. Dumbledore returned to the staff table, and the platters on the students' tables filled with steaming, fragrant dishes. Conversation and laughter rose across the hall. This year's main topic wasn't as varied as the last. Everyone seemed fixated on Gilderoy Lockhart. Dumbledore's robes were usually the flashiest of the professors, but Lockhart outshone him. He wore a full set of lilac robes studded with sequins so densely that whenever he smiled, the sequins flashed like a human disco ball. 2 badges gleamed on his chest, the Order of Merlin, 3rd class, and an honorary membership badge from the Defense Against the Dark Arts League. His golden hair was heavily styled and sprayed into perfect waves, refusing to be flattened by his sequin-pointed hat. As the last slice of dessert vanished, Dumbledore rose again to make a few announcements, largely the same precautions as last year. He mentioned that the corridor on the right side of the 4th floor was unsealed and could be used without penalties. Additionally, we should welcome a new professor, he said, motioning behind him. Our new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, Gilderoy Lockhart. Lockhart smoothed his robes and prepared to speak, but Dumbledore seemed to anticipate this and didn't give him the floor. I believe you all know him well enough. There's no need for an introduction. Let us sing, then retire for the evening. Golden ribbons rose and twisted into a cursive script floating above the hall. Lockhart's admirers sighed in disappointment. Those who disliked him suddenly found themselves eager to sing the school song. Dumbledore, radiant, raised his wand like a conductor's baton. Ready, sing! Whether it was an illusion or not, Vizette felt the school song felt livelier this year than before. The feast wound down, and amid yawns, the students headed back to their common rooms. After Penelope showed Luna to her dormitory, Luna returned to the Ravenclaw common room and took a seat at a table with Vizette. They had agreed to write a letter to Xenophilius that night so they could post it the next day. Luna dug out the sketchbook she always carried. "I want to send a drawing home," she said. "What can I do?" Vizette frowned in thought for a moment. "How about you draw a flat picture and I make it three-dimensional?" Luna's eyes lit up. "Three-dimensional? Like the pop-up books we saw in the department store?" "Something like that," Vizette said with a small smile, "but more magical." Seeing him smile, Luna seemed already to picture the finished piece. "Father will love it." While Luna sketched, Vizette ran through ways to make the idea work. He would need to use techniques for enchanted objects, things he'd been studying in Grindelwald's notes over the summer. That would be straightforward enough. Still, he wasn't content with simple enchantments. He wanted it to be perfect, to have a surprising, delightful effect that would make the gift unforgettable. 202. Grindelwald's recording spell. Luna's new painting was still practically warm, a blonde girl on a train beneath a star-studded sky, the engine steaming slowly into the platform, and a magnificent, brightly lit castle glittering in the distance. There was a little magic powder left over from making the crystal ball hand rope, and Vizette decided it could be used on the painting. The powder's purpose was to fix enchantments so the magic would stay on the paper. He traced the contours of the scene with the dust, murmured a spell, and waved his wand. The train, the tracks, the platform, and the castle seemed to spring out of the paper like miniature models. "The wheels need to turn, and the steam needs to flow," he murmured. He thought for a moment, pinched the last of the powder between his fingers, and sprinkled it over the wheels and billowing steam while continuing to chant. The wheels and steam began to move slowly. The blonde girl rocked back and forth as if in stop motion. Luna clapped, delighted. "This is so much better. It feels like a proper magical painting." "We should add sound," Vizette said with a small smile. "Luna, say a few words and we'll leave them in the painting." He drew an incomplete oval in the air with his wand and uttered a nameless charm from Grindelwald's notes. Echoing sound. Grindelwald had left the gesture and chanting patterns in his notebooks without giving the spell a formal title. Its effect was simple. It could record sound into a magical object. Vizette called it the recording charm. Grindelwald had also demonstrated the technique himself and had left a recording of Plato's Symposium as an example. His voice on the page had been deep and magnetic, measured and precise, suffused with self-confidence. Vizette tapped the painted girl with his wand, and a warm emerald-green halo bloomed around her. Luna leaned close and whispered to the image, "Dad, I'm already at Hogwarts. It's as magical as you said. Take care of yourself at home, okay?" Vizette folded the paper, and the floating figures shrank back down into a regular painting as the sheet closed. He opened and refolded it several times to make sure the three-dimensional scene would reliably reappear, then handed it back to Luna. When he'd seen Luna safely to her dormitory, Vizette returned to the common room and took out his notebook to review the plan he'd drafted over the summer. Study the memory charm, observe Professor McGonagall's animagus transformations, attend Professor Snape's private lessons, research Headmaster Dumbledore's armor enchantments, and, of course, the Chamber of Secrets. Serena Pendragon's letter had put the chamber at the top of his list. Getting inside should yield a great deal of ancient magic. As the other students drifted off to bed, Vizette slipped out of the common room and climbed the spiral staircase. Hogwarts was quiet at that hour. A few windows were open, and the wind threaded through the corridors like a ghostly murmur. He had seen many kinds of ghosts in the wizarding world, but Peeves was a different breed entirely. The poltergeist was at the end of a corridor, tugging at a suit of armor and making it prance about. The armor's creaks and Peeves' raucous cackling turned into a comical overture. The return of the students had put Peeves in gleeful spirits. Between his off-key singing and outrageous rhymes, he filled the hall with noise. "Don't dread my presence. Mischief's my art. The wind in the corridor is my laughter. The library's turning pages my truant heart," Peeves sang, pulling and shoving the armor. "Look, this ancient suit will dance for me. Don't let gloom steal your grin. In this magical school, come find joy again. Keep your laughter ready, and sharpen your scream. Through dungeons and towers my legend will gleam." His song broke off when Mr. Filch appeared, shuffling and scowling, evidently having noticed the ruckus. Peeves, making noise in the corridor. Out, Filch barked. Peeves cackled. Ah, it's you again. But Peeves is joyous today. Let my dancing partner play with you. He began flinging pieces of the armor at Filch. Filch and Peeves were longtime adversaries and the kind of unpredictable hazard one minded to avoid at night. Vizette wasted no time. He dashed to the moving stair and leaped down. Primal force, Obscurus state, elementary, he muttered as he descended. His eyes darkened like polished onyx, and a swirl of black mist wrapped around him, granting him a lithe flight that let him bypass the staircase entirely. The spell saved him precious minutes. Following the hints Serena had given him, he threaded down an unfamiliar passage. Portraits along the way were awake and called out cheerful greetings as he passed. He smiled and nodded until he reached the end of the corridor and stood before a tall mahogany cabinet inset with metal gear discs that resembled a vast clock face engraved with suns and stars. "This is it," he said. He pressed his wand against one of the discs and nudged a pointer. He whispered, "Our time is engraved here." A series of clicks answered him. The gears began to turn, and a hidden metal door swung open, revealing a dim staircase leading downward. Vizette did not cast a lighting charm. Instead, he willed his left fingers to change, their tips curling and elongating into sinuous coils, the ancient magic of self-shaping devil's snare form. He stepped inside and closed the metal door behind him. He cast Magic Eye, feeling the spell's scrutiny spread, and tightened his grip on his wand with his right hand. He kept the improved extinguishing charm ready to unleash at a moment's notice to create a pitch-black field of anti-magic energy. His experience in the mirror world had taught him that guardian places often held trials. He intended to be cautious so he could still attend class the next day. Vizette descended the stairs, and the mist that had filled his mind from the map gradually cleared. With a faint click, the distant iron gate swung open, revealing an empty room. It looked like a storeroom, but it had been cleaned regularly. There was no dust, only a few cobwebs clinging to corners. Shelves ran along every wall, holding large wine barrels. The space was at least the size of 2 classrooms. Armored dummies were set about between the shelves. Their metal breastplates were pitted and dented, as if they'd been used for magic experiments. Piles of books lay scattered across the floor. Vizette felt a small thrill as he picked one up. The moment his fingers touched the cover, there was a strange sensation, as if he were touching a person rather than a book. There was no warmth or pulse, yet the feeling was unnervingly alive. He also heard a faint buzzing in his head, as if the books were whispering to him. He cast his Magic Eye and scanned the littered volumes. They were bound by some kind of magic, but through the enchanted pages, he could only see a blurry mass, nothing like a proper magical circuit. Curious, he flipped the book ahead with a levitation charm. The pages were blank, as clean as a new notebook. "Are they all like this?" he muttered. He frowned, gripped his wand, and gave it a sharp lift. Instantly, every book in the room rose and hovered around him like a flock of small birds. He maintained his Magic Eye and searched each blank volume until finally he found a single loose page tucked between bindings. Under the Magic Eye, it glowed with a familiar silver-blue light, heavy with ancient magic power. He isolated the page with a wave of his wand and sent the other books drifting to a corner. The page felt ordinary compared to the strange tactile impressions of the others. It was made from something like snake scales, and on the front someone had drawn a stark white skull with eerie realism. In the bottom right corner, a familiar signature read, Serena Pendragon. The page gave off a distinct ritualistic air. Under the skull was a simple line, simple and easy to learn, allowing you to easily master Imperio. Imperio, one of the 3 unforgivable curses. The ministry called it an extremely cruel dark art, and wizarding law was clear. Any use of an unforgivable curse on a person carries a life sentence in Azkaban. Yet Imperio was also notorious for being used covertly. When Lord Voldemort's power rose, many wizards claimed they had acted under his control to excuse their crimes. That ability to mask intent, combined with the curse's infamy, had always made Vizette curious about how Imperio actually worked. Serena's Cavalier line, simple and easy to learn, made him even more interested. He turned the page and read Serena's notes. To cast an unforgivable curse, the caster must have sufficient determination. This is the most important thing. If the caster is soft-hearted, the result could be dangerous. At best, the curse will simply fail. At worst, it might backfire on its user. I have never been backfired upon by an unforgivable curse, so I cannot describe what backfire truly feels like. Now for the teaching portion. First, remember the incantation, Imperio. Next, choose whatever wand movement suits you. Then find a living creature and chant the spell. Congratulations, you have learned Imperio. Vizette read the lines twice and felt a chill at the bluntness. No elaborate syllable work, no precise wand work required, merely the incantation and resolve. Perhaps that's why they call them unforgivable, he thought. Compared to dark arts that demanded years of study and intricate foundations, Imperio was shockingly crude. He mouthed the word Imperio, Imperio. He repeated it until it lodged in his memory. There were cobwebs in a corner of the room. A spider clung upside down to one of them, a convenient, harmless test subject. Imperio, he said aloud. He pointed his wand at the spider. A peculiar sensation sprang from the tip of the wand, surged along the shaft, into his fingers, up his arm and poured into his mind. A warm, tingling current. A thought formed. He could control it. He traced a perfect circle in the air with the wand. The spider's limbs went stiff as if pulled by strings. It descended on its silk and began to walk in a perfect circular pattern, matching the trace of his wand like a marionette. When he broke the command, the spider froze, then scuttled away as if shaken. Vizette frowned. He had not expected Imperio to be so easy. To cast it required nothing grand, a short incantation and a firm intent to dominate. Compared to the dark arts he'd learned the previous school year, Imperio was almost crude in its simplicity. If he had to reach for a comparison from his previous life, it was like the difference between a boxer and a gunman. A boxer trains years to master skill and build a body to survive. A gunman only needs to know how to pull a trigger and have enough ammunition. Still, Vizette pulled some useful conclusions from his first experiment. First, Imperio could seize control of a living being's will simply by speaking the incantation. The caster did not need to understand the nature of souls to do it. Second, the scope of commands one could give while under Imperio was surprisingly precise, down to minute measurements. If he wanted, he could order the spider to move left by 0.5 millimeter, and it would comply. The sensation of control was uncanny. It felt as though he had become the spider's soul, issuing orders to its body. 204. The real guardian chamber? Wait, a flash of inspiration struck Vizette. Imperio had such a distinctive nature. Could it be used to study souls? Maybe the original purpose of Imperio's development had been to allow wizards to control a person's will by the simplest means. To Vizette, however, the spell suggested another application. As he had once told Snape, the dark arts were tools, a weapon, or a scalpel. Even if using them invited a trace of malice, he could neutralize that with the purity cleansing charm and avoid the fallout. He had once lived with an Obscurus, constantly on guard against malevolent influences. That experience had made him especially sensitive to those effects and able to compensate in time to keep himself safe. After learning Imperio, Vizette walked the room again. Having absorbed the ancient magic power here, he moved to a corner and examined the floor with his magic eye. A pulsating silver-blue glow lay there, eerily like the light he had seen in the mirror world. Nox, he cast the improved extinguishing charm. A pitch-black field of magic spread, blanketing the silver-blue pulse. He pointed his wand at the glow and drew it upward. A tall mirror rose out of the floor. It resembled the Mirror of Erised in stature and grandeur, but the frame was different. Instead of serpentine carving, this frame bore rising vortex patterns, a clear symbol of ancient magic. The glass behaved like any mirror at first, showing Vizette holding his wand. But when he looked closer, the image behind him did not match the room. Where there should have been a wine barrel rack, the reflection showed only darkness, with the vague outline of a short flight of stairs. Ancient magic, self-shaping, demon snare form, he murmured. Vizette transformed his hand into a demon's snare and probed the mirror's surface. The tendril passed through and perceived another place on the far side, utter blackness that heightened the snare's senses. He extended it further and found, beyond the glass, a small stone platform with a staircase spiraling downward. So this room is just a transit point, he concluded. The real Chamber of Secrets must be on the other side of the mirror. The room itself could be entered by a simple spell, but pulling up that mirror required someone who could sense ancient magic power. He lengthened the demon's snare as far as he dared, stepped through the mirror, and descended the hidden stair. The other side was carved into living rock. The stone was damp and slick. A cool, watery smell hung in the air. Torchlight flickered ahead, and soon he reached a tall metal door, an exquisitely worked bronze slab covered in reliefs. At its center was the most striking motif, a vortex pattern, the same symbol of ancient magic he had seen on the frame. Vizette pressed his wand to the vortex. The Obscurus core at the wand's heart pulsed, channeling ancient magic power into the design. The vortex began to glow, shifting as though stirred by the torchlight. A crack traced down the middle of the door. With a low rumble, the bronze split and swung open, revealing a larger cavern beyond. He peered into the distance and frowned. The passage ran deeper still. It looks like it will take a long time to reach the real chamber, he said to himself. After a moment, he decided to stop there for the night and return well-rested. He would continue the exploration over the weekend. Perhaps because he hadn't slept on the train and had spent the night exploring Hogwarts, Vizette slept deeply. When the first pale bar of morning sun slipped through the curtains and warmed his face, he opened his eyes and sat up. His roommates were still asleep. After dressing, he slipped out of the dormitory and down to the common room. Luna was up early too, perched on the windowsill with her knees drawn to her chest, staring toward the forbidden forest. She traced something on the glass with her fingertip. "Thinking of watering the plants in the garden?" Vizette asked. Luna smiled a little. "I only remembered that I was back at Hogwarts when I came downstairs," she said. Vizette noticed faint streaks on the window, an outline that looked like a horse with wings, painfully gaunt. It couldn't be Freya, the eight-legged steed. Curiosity caught him. "What kind of horse is that? Is it from the Forbidden Forest?" "Thestrals," Luna said, delighted. "Very rare magical creatures. I didn't expect Hogwarts to have so many." She traced a graceful line on the glass as she spoke. "One flew out of the edge of the forest just now, then shot back in, faster than Thor and Diana." Following the line with his magic eye, Vizette could see the treetops sway and faint, blurry magical circuits shimmered among the branches, circuits he recognized from the winter after Christmas, when he rode the Hogwarts carriages. "So those are Thestrals," he said. "The Hogwarts carriages are pulled by Thestrals." "But I can't see them properly," Luna replied. "I can only sense them a little. What do they actually look like?" Luna cocked her head, and a strand of hair fell across her forehead. "I'll draw one for you. They're quite sweet, really." She fetched her sketchbook and quickly penciled the form. The body of a horse, a dragon-like face, and huge bat-like wings. The creature looked almost skeletal, skin stretched over pronounced joints, giving it an uncanny appearance. "It looks like the Grim Reaper's mount," Vizette mused. "Could you make it move, like that drawing from last night?" "Thestrals can't be made to move like that," Luna said, shaking her head gently. "People misunderstand them a lot. Lots of wizards think they're sinister because they feed on carrion or have a bloody smell, so they're considered ominous. And not everyone can see them," she added. "Only people who've witnessed and properly understood death can see Thestrals." Luna's expression dimmed a little with disappointment. Vizette brightened. "Do you remember the dirigible plum saplings you sent me last year?" "I remember." Luna's face lit up. "You used to write about the saplings a lot, but you didn't bring any back over the summer." "It grew too well to fit in my luggage," Vizette explained, "so I left it at Hogwarts." "You mean," Luna's eyes widened, "in Professor Sprout's greenhouse," he finished. "She saw the sapling in my arms and agreed to keep it." 205. Water-making charm and the Rubik's Cube theory. Vizette and Luna hurried down the moving staircase and jogged across the castle grounds to the greenhouses. The door to the first greenhouse was open. Vizette led Luna inside and into the second, where a busy figure could be seen between the leaves. Professor Sprout was already up, holding a pot of fertilizer that glowed faintly blue, dragon dung from a Swedish short snout, a souvenir Vizette had brought back. Sprout loved tending to plants, and a sack of high-quality dragon dung made an excellent gift. "Vizette, good morning," she called when she saw them. She put the small trowel back into the pot, waved and smiled. And this must be the lovely girl. You're Luna, aren't you? Professor Sprout, good morning, Vizette replied cheerfully. Luna bowed. Hello, Professor Sprout, I'm Luna. I hear Vizette talks about you often, Sprout said kindly. Are you here to see the dirigible plum? I'll take you over. It's mostly that Luna just left home, so she's a little unaccustomed, Vizette cut in. He stepped forward and briefly explained their situation at home and how they'd come down to help in the greenhouses. She sounds like a girl who loves life, Professor Sprout said, her smile widening. Then let's help together. All the tools you need are here. Oh, how are those color-changing crab claws? Easy to care for. Luna picked up a trowel and followed Sprout. They're especially easy to care for and very lively, she said with a smile. I actually drew them all, Luna added. I left my sketchbook back in the dormitory. Shall I bring it next time to show you? That would be wonderful. I'd love that. Sprout clapped her hands lightly. Luna and Professor Sprout dug in with their trowels while Vizette stood by with his wand. Aguamenti, he said, sending a steady stream of water to the thirsty plants. With 2 digging and 1 watering, the 3 of them were soon busy in the second greenhouse. The water-making charm is a very practical spell, Professor Sprout said approvingly, watching Vizette. Being able to control the flow like that, you're already quite proficient. If I asked you to use the water-making charm to create pure water, could you try, she added. I've tried before, Vizette answered. I didn't adjust the purity for the plants. They don't need pure water, so I mostly control the flow. Professor Sprout smiled. I'm no longer surprised by the things you show me. She picked up her wand. The water-making charm is a basic spell. You went to Sweden during the summer holidays, didn't you? I remember reading that some variations of the water-making charm came from there. Since you learned it starting from the ritual form, your understanding should be deeper. Vizette nodded. Yes, Professor Sprout. Well then, Sprout said, a playful gleam in her eye, that calls for a little extra credit. She laughed. Since you learned it that way, you must have a good grasp. I'll take this chance to explain some advanced ideas. Would you like to hear me ramble? Please, Vizette said eagerly. Professor Sprout looked at Luna as well. If you don't understand, Luna, come ask me later, but I think Vizette will enjoy answering questions. I will, Professor Sprout, Luna said, smiling and winking at Vizette. Clearing her throat, Sprout continued, the water-making charm is basic, yes, but that means it has many variations. Not only can you adjust the purity of the water itself, you can combine it with other spells to extend its effects. Do you understand that idea? Vizette thought of Flitwick's demonstrations. For example, combining the water-making charm with a freezing charm? Yes, a classic pairing, Professor Sprout agreed. Philus has probably shown you that already, even wandless and nonverbal, so I won't pretend it's new. The reason we teach the water-making charm in 6th year is to expand its applications. By combining it with other magic, you can achieve very different results. It's like a Rubik's Cube, she said suddenly. You know what a Rubik's Cube is, right? It's a muggle toy. I once received one for Christmas. It's an interesting puzzle. We know, Vizette and Luna both said. They had seen them in muggle shops. Good, Sprout smiled. Think of a solved Rubik's Cube as the most basic water-making charm. During the solving process, the colorful patterns the cube displays are like adding other magic. The configuration changes, but it's still a Rubik's Cube at its core. Likewise, when you add the fire-making charm, it's like the red face of the cube, an added aspect, but the essence of the cube remains the same. Extend your hands and feel it, she added, and with a quick flick murmured, Aguamenti. The analogy clicked for Vizette. A Rubik's Cube was a 3-dimensional puzzle of many small blocks that rotate independently with the aim of making each face a single color. No matter how scrambled the colors became, it was still a Rubik's Cube. Similarly, the water-making charm remains the water-making charm even when you add other magic. The idea resonated with his knowledge of transfiguration. Different methods could lead to the same result, and the underlying essence could be preserved even as details changed. Professor Sprout's deep understanding of the charm came from her love of herbology. She delved into other branches of magic so she could better tend to plants. In extreme cases, she even learned to imbue the water with potion-like effects so it could act as a temporary fertilizer. The morning sun had climbed a little higher, and Hogwarts was stirring. Footsteps approached from the direction of the first greenhouse, and Hannah Abbott appeared in the doorway. "Good morning, Professor Sprout," she called, looking around the second greenhouse and then at Vizette with a surprised smile. "Vizette, what are you doing here?" "He and Luna came to help," Sprout said cheerfully. "I thought today would be busy, but with you all here, I'll have a much easier time." There were several greenhouses around Hogwarts Castle. Last year, herbology had been held in the first greenhouse, so this was Vizette's first time in the third. When he pushed open the slightly heavy oak door, a wave of warm, humid air rushed out, carrying the scents of earth, fertilizer, and a heady floral perfume. The space was much larger than the first greenhouse, and the plants grown here were far more exotic. Under the tall glass dome, colorful blooms hung like umbrellas, their perfume filling the air. With Hannah helping, they finished watering and fertilizing much faster. As head of Hufflepuff, Professor Sprout often had Hufflepuff students dropping by in the mornings and evenings to lend a hand. Hannah was one of the most eager, delighted by every strange magical plant. She and Luna had already found common ground and, though newly acquainted, had clicked quickly, chatting as if they'd known each other for years. Vizette kept asking questions about the Aquamenti spell he had just practiced, and Professor Sprout answered him patiently. Before long, their chores in the third greenhouse were done. Professor Sprout brought over cups of warm water sweetened with Dittany honey, refreshing and soothing, and they drank. After half a cup, she knocked on a second inner door and smiled. "Would you like to come in and take a look? There are more lovely plants inside." They followed her through. The third greenhouse was the most complex of them all, divided into several sections. The area they entered was the planting section, with an even greater variety of vigorous plants, both leafy and fungal, all arranged in neat rows and potted, perhaps for teaching safety. The glossy, thick leaves of one group caught Vizette's eye. He leaned closer. "Professor Sprout, are those mandrakes?" "You're right, mandrakes," she replied, her voice carrying in the humid air. "They're still small and will need a lot more time to mature. I spent most of the summer working out their preferences before adding them to the syllabus. Your first lesson will cover them." "You're also welcome," Vizette said with a small smile when she mentioned the dragon dung he had sent. "I'm glad it helped." According to 1,000 magical herbs and fungi, mandrakes usually survive only in the wild and are difficult to cultivate in greenhouses. That Professor Sprout had not only kept them alive, but included them in the teaching plan, spoke to her expertise. He looked further around the planting beds. Several vines twisted gently, their stems a dangerous emerald and bristling with sharp thorns. At the ends of some vines were flowers that opened like mouths, petals parting and closing like lips, thorns inside and out, ferocious in appearance. "That's a venomous tentacula," Professor Sprout confirmed. "They're similar to devil's snare in temperament, tend to grasp and wrap, but venomous tentacula have fewer weaknesses. Their thorns and flowers can secrete venom that's deadly." Nearby, about 10 round green bulbs sat in their pots like heads of tender cabbage, slightly trembling. A closer look revealed fangs at their centers. "Bouncing bulbs," Vizette muttered. These aggressive plants rolled and snapped at anything that came within range. Other beds held toxic or hallucinogenic specimens. Deep purple belladonna berries and slender stalks of wolfsbane with their trumpet-shaped purple blooms. Both were prized potion ingredients and, combined correctly, could be used in witches' flying ointment. Professor Sprout laughed when Vizette named them. "You seem to know the dangerous ones." "I know at least the dangerous ones," he admitted. "You must learn how to live with them," she said cheerfully. "They're all my lovely children, really." Vizette found himself thinking she was a lot like Hagrid, both fond of the more assertive creatures. Hagrid adored dragons and wanted to raise one to adulthood. Professor Sprout, he imagined, might whisper to a venomous tentacula much the way Hagrid whispered to his beasts. When they were ready to leave, Vizette drew his wand and muttered, "Scourgify!" The spell cleaned the soil from Luna's and Hannah's robes. Hannah twirled her skirt, delighted. "Now I can skip the common room and head straight to the Great Hall." They walked to breakfast together. After saying goodbye to Hannah, Vizette and Luna went to the Ravenclaw table. While they ate, Vizette summoned their textbooks with a quiet summoning charm and unfolded a small, simple map. "Potions is the first class," he said, tracing the route. "Go that way, then down the stairs. The dungeons don't have many classrooms, so it's easy to find." "You should get there a little early," Luna warned. "Professor Snape is strict. He's been known to say some unpleasant things to students who arrive late." "I'll manage," Vizette replied calmly. "You haven't eaten," Luna scolded gently, tucking the map away. "Have some breakfast." Vizette remembered and added, "Potions is 2 periods back to back. You should eat enough, otherwise you'll be hungry." He spread jam on a slice of bread and placed it on Luna's plate. She, preferring lighter tastes, had already thought of him and buttered a slice to put on his plate. "Eat quickly," she said, "or you'll be hungry later." 207. The transformation of following the current. By the time Vizette and Luna were nearly finished with breakfast, Vizette's roommates, who had been running late, appeared across from them. Michael grabbed a glass of pumpkin juice and took a long gulp. "Vizette, where did you two go this morning? We couldn't find you anywhere." Vizette explained. "We went to the greenhouse this morning. Then we helped Professor Sprout water and fertilize the plants." "See, I told you, you were overthinking it," Anthony scoffed. "You said they'd be hiding in some secluded corner or by the Black Lake. What's going on in your head?" "What's in my head?" Michael rolled his eyes at Anthony. "The same thing that's in yours. You act like you didn't come with me. Weren't you following me around looking for him?" Chris sat down laughing. "Exactly. I'm different. I just went back to sleep." Terry rolled his eyes at Chris. "Are you bragging about that? If we hadn't come back for our textbooks, you would have overslept." "Let's not get into that. What about today's classes?" Chris changed the subject with an embarrassed smile and pulled out his timetable. "We have 2 classes this morning. One is Transfiguration, which we have with Slytherin, and the other is History of Magic, with Hufflepuff." "Transfiguration," Anthony sighed. "I flipped through the textbook a few days ago. According to the syllabus, the difficulty in Transfiguration goes up again this year." "It does," Terry agreed. "Before we were turning matches into needles, but this year it's all about transforming living things." "No big deal," Michael said. "We can ask Vizette first." Chris brightened. "Right. At the end of last term, I saw that snuff box he transformed. It was exquisite. Even the carvings were very detailed." On hearing this, Vizette drank his milk in one long swallow. "Professor McGonagall must have taken the summer break into account, so the first class won't be too hard. Even if we're transforming living things, the textbook will probably stick to insects or other simple creatures," Michael said cheerfully. "It'll be fine." Vizette added, "You can also base your transfiguration on the original shape of the thing and let the transformation flow naturally from that. Just like my snuff box last semester, the overall form was the original mouse shape. Then I refined it into a snuff box. And I smoothed the mouse fur and made the carvings follow the grain of the fur. That got me a decent result." "Now that you mention it, it did look like a mouse," Chris said, thinking back. "Oh, Professor McGonagall mentioned that too. The pull string you added to the lid was brilliant. She even gave you an O." Vizette nodded. "So, can you guess what that pull string originally was?" "His tail," the roommates and nearby students realized all at once. It was the mouse's tail. The students headed for class seemed to have the same sudden understanding. "Yes," Vizette said. "This transfiguration isn't necessarily more difficult. If you observe the original object carefully, you can find a breakthrough to make your work stand out." At the Slytherin table nearby, Goyle had overheard and nodded, half comprehending. "So that's how it is. Makes sense, I suppose." "That's only because you don't understand," Pansy sneered as she prodded her bread with a fork. "Draco, isn't that right?" Draco nodded absent-mindedly, thinking about Vizette's suggestion. Perhaps he really could try that approach. The Transfiguration classroom was on the 2nd floor. The Potions classroom was down in the dungeons. Vizette and Luna left the Great Hall and headed toward their respective rooms. As Vizette stepped onto the marble staircase, he glanced back, and Luna did the same. Their eyes met. They waved and mouthed, "See you at noon." Vizette's hunch was right. As the first Transfiguration lesson after the summer holidays, Professor McGonagall hadn't set anything too challenging. Compared to last term's mouse-to-snuff-box final, turning a ladybug into a button was far easier. Vizette flicked his wand and flattened the ladybug into a bright eyelet button. The patterns on its back became the eyelets, clustered in the center. He frowned slightly at the result and reshaped it into a blind eyelet button with a metallic sheen, then etched decorative patterns into the surface to give it an ancient, dignified look. I should add something else to make it different from an ordinary button, he thought. The more he considered Professor Sprout's Rubik's Cube theory, the idea that transfiguration can have many variations and can be combined with other magic, the more an idea formed. Why not weave a spell into the transfiguration itself to make the button do more than sit on a sleeve? He let the ladybug return to its original form and prowl the desk. Picking up his wand, he experimented with his understanding of the theory. He lightly touched the insect and muttered, "Scourgify." The ladybug flattened and then rose again, its surface now engraved with fine patterns. Compared with the earlier blind eyelet button, this one gleamed more brightly. He adjusted the color until it took on a natural silver metallic texture, which made the shine even clearer. Professor McGonagall was pleased with the class. Ravenclaw's overall standard was good, and there had been no small disasters. She was confident that by the end of the lesson, everyone would be able to turn a ladybug into a button. What surprised her was Goyle. He had improved noticeably. The ladybug in front of him was still moving, but it was flattened, and with one more step, he could change its tarsus. Draco, too, was working diligently to shape the insect's markings into eyelets. After a quick circuit, Professor McGonagall came to Vizette's desk and examined the blind eyelet button. Making a blind eyelet button from a ladybug was certainly harder than a plain eyelet button. She picked it up to study the details, and then found something even more surprising. "Vizette, you've embedded an extra charm in this button?" she asked. "Yes, Professor," Vizette replied. "I added a scouring charm inside. If you press the button, it activates." 208. Button with a scouring charm. Professor McGonagall pressed the button gently. It twitched in her palm, and she said, "Scourgify." A small breeze swept over her, carrying away a speck of dust. She turned the dark eyelet button over, and for the first time that hour, her usually severe mouth softened into a small smile. "A very clever idea. How did you think of this?" Vizette briefly recounted the morning's events, emphasizing his grasp of what he called Rubik's Cube theory and how he'd practiced the idea through transfiguration. He'd originally meant to make a glowing button, but it hadn't felt refined enough. After thinking it over, he'd combined techniques used in creating magical items with principles from wand making and added a few minor related details to produce the effect he'd shown. "Excellent," Professor McGonagall nodded, pleased. "That's the path that suits you. Very ingenious transfiguration. I'll award 20 points to Ravenclaw." She held the dark button up for the class to see. "Everyone, look at this. This is the button Mr. Lovegood transformed. It's already bordering on the realm of magical items," she added. "Not only did he transform a ladybird into a button, but he's also incorporated a scouring charm." A Slytherin girl's voice piped up in confusion. "Incorporated a scouring charm? What does that mean?" "You can try it, Miss Greengrass." McGonagall lowered her hand and placed the button in Daphne Greengrass's palm. "Just press it gently." Greengrass frowned as she examined the button, then pressed it warily. "Scourgify." The spell produced a small ball of dust and a few strands of hair. The hair had been clinging to her robes. Pansy Parkinson, standing behind her, grabbed the button. "Daphne, let me see!" "Okay," Daphne handed it over. Pansy pressed it. Another incantation, another mote of dust. She inspected it with a skeptical look. "This really isn't a manufactured magical item?" Draco stepped forward. "Pansy," he began, reaching for the button. The button went from hand to hand among the Slytherins until, quite suddenly, it reverted to a tiny ladybird and scurried away. The transformation back made it clear. This was genuine transfiguration, not a pre-made enchantment masquerading as an object. That revelation only increased their astonishment. They hadn't been looking at a clever manufactured charm at all, but at transfiguration performed with a built-in scouring charm. All the students wanted to know the principle behind it. If they could reproduce a button that cleaned on command, it would save a great deal of trouble. Yet after Vizette's explanation and some forced attempts, most of them remained confused. Even attempting to combine transfiguration with a scouring charm, as he described, proved difficult. Professor McGonagall gently shook her head. The knowledge required wasn't only transfiguration. Given the other students' current reserves of magical theory, their inability to replicate it was to be expected. When the bell rang for the end of class, the students collected their transformed creations and left laughing. As Vizette gathered his things, McGonagall called softly, "Vizette, stay behind for a moment." When the classroom had emptied, Professor McGonagall appraised him seriously. "Do you remember what I said to you at the end of last school year?" "Of course," Vizette said. "Animagus, you told me to consider it. I saw the mandrakes when I was in the greenhouses this morning." Her eyes brightened. "Although that button can cast a scouring charm, you preserved the essence of transfiguration. That shows very good discipline. This suggests you might be suited to becoming an animagus," she continued, becoming more formal. "But it's a long, dangerous process and must be treated with utmost seriousness. Vizette, are you truly prepared?" "I am," he answered without hesitation. "Even if I don't succeed in becoming an animagus, the learning process will be very beneficial." "That's the right attitude." She smiled at him. "Then let's set a time. Saturday at 2 in the afternoon. Does that suit you? And one more thing. Do not tell anyone. Without proper guidance and a few helpful tips, attempting animagus transformation can be more hazardous than people imagine." "I won't reveal it," Vizette promised immediately. "I'll be there on time." He thanked her repeatedly until Hermione arrived at the empty classroom doorway. He collected his textbooks and hurried off to History of Magic. The next transfiguration period began, and McGonagall felt the good humor from earlier ebbing away. Ravenclaw had performed steadily well, but Gryffindor seemed to have forgotten the lesson, reverting to chaotic tussles with ladybirds. Harry Potter appeared to be wrestling his bunch's insect like it were trying to escape. He poked at it constantly with his wand to keep it from falling off the desk. Seamus Finnegan was spectacular in the worst way. His spell was so vigorous that he incinerated the beetle into a blackened husk and cracked his desk in the process. Only Hermione Granger's work pleased McGonagall. She completed the transformation quickly and did her best to guide Ron and Harry, showing far more progress than the previous year. Hufflepuff, however, provided a pleasant surprise. Their approach had been smooth and methodical, very similar to Ravenclaw's method from earlier. They flattened the ladybird's body, formed the tarsi, and transformed the spots into neat eyelet buttons. After watching Hannah Abbott's attempt, McGonagall turned to her. "Miss Abbott, your method was very clear. Would you like to share it with the class?" Hannah nearly jumped at being singled out. The button she'd made flickered back into a ladybird and scuttled across the desk. She waved her hands and stammered, I can't explain it properly. I really can't." "But the button you made was very pretty," McGonagall said gently. "It shows you know what you're doing. You should have confidence. Share your insights with the others. I'll give Hufflepuff 5 points." "5 points?" Hannah blinked in surprise. "But I only heard Vizette say to do it like that." She picked up her wand and tried to demonstrate again. "He told me to follow the shape of the original object. Ladybirds are round, so I tried to picture a round button shaped like a ladybird." Nerves got the better of her. Despite her intention, she managed only to flatten the body again and couldn't complete the tarsi. Professor McGonagall heard her last words and called through the hum of the classroom. "Vizette?" Hannah nodded. "Yes, he just happened to be talking about it with others at breakfast in the Great Hall." 5 points to Hufflepuff, Professor McGonagall awarded, then added, "You can be patient. Don't rush." Hannah forced a smile. "Okay, Professor McGonagall." McGonagall continued her patrol, glancing around the hall. On either side of the Ravenclaw table sat Slytherin and Hufflepuff. She understood a little more clearly now why Ravenclaw often did so well. Hogwarts Castle, the dungeon, potions classroom. "Luna Lovegood? Here!" Snape barely turned his head. His gaze flicked over Luna as she lowered her hand, then went on calling the roll. After attendance, he gave his usual opening, short, clipped remarks that set the room to match the dungeon. Cool, tense, and uncomfortable. Most of the students sat stiffly, all posture and anxious eyes fixed on the front. Luna, however, remained serenely at ease, her wide eyes taking in everything with quiet curiosity, untouched by the oppressive air. Snape's gaze lingered on the textbook open in front of her, a hand-drawn copy he recognized. He'd seen one like it before in Vizette's hands during the first class last year. He narrowed his eyes and pursed his lips. A soft, disapproving noise escaped him. A few students shivered. The room felt even colder. Snape moved on with the lesson, reviewing ingredients for the boil-curing potion and writing the procedure on the blackboard. He called on students, sharp and demanding. "Mr. Pox, what are the dosage and preparation for the slugs?" Professor Snape, 3, steamed. 3 horned slugs, then. Ravenclaw loses 2 points. Miss Dougal, how do you prepare snake fangs? Professor Snape, the snake fangs need to be ground. Grind them as finely as possible. Can't you read what's on the board? Hufflepuff loses 2 points. After a round of such interrogations, Snape seemed more satisfied and turned back to Luna. He paused, then asked, "Miss Lovegood, what is the use of the boil-curing potion?" Luna rose and answered in her clear, otherworldly voice. "Professor Snape, it can be used to treat various skin ailments, like pustules, measles, boils." Snape's tone sharpened. "Oh, it can be used on plants as well? This potion works on plant disease?" "Yes," Luna brightened. "It can be used for powdery mildew and black spot. It works well." Snape shifted his expression. "You have used it?" "I have," Luna nodded. "Vizette used to send it to me last year. It worked as well as the fungicide I used before." At the name Vizette, Snape's face went cold, his voice dropping. "That's because you didn't consider the cost. 1 bottle of this potion could buy you 3 bottles of fungicide. Sit down." "Thank you, Professor Snape." Luna sat, and the other students looked at her with curiosity. So far, she was the only one who hadn't lost points during questioning. Snape tapped the podium. "Since the textbook doesn't mention that, you'd best write it down. Or would you like me to help you remember?" The rustle of quills filled the room. He tapped the podium again. "Now, pair up. Prepare your materials. I expect a finished potion by the end of class." Before he finished speaking, the students were already scrambling. A chill hung in the dungeon, and even when fires were lit and cauldrons placed over them, the cold felt bone-deep. Perhaps only Luna was immune. She hummed softly as she went through the motions, calm and meticulous. Her composure steadied her partner and roommate, Amy Carr Miller. Amy C. Miller produced a mortar and began grinding snake fangs with growing concentration. She had browner skin than Luna and wore a black hairband in her shoulder-length hair. Snape moved through the rows with a predatory gait, robes flaring, arms folded. His footsteps seemed to synchronize with the students' pulses. When he stopped near a table, a student's heart would stutter. "Stir the cauldron. Don't you know the potion will scorch? Grind the snake fangs. Those are still in chunks. Are you preparing them for the end-of-year exam like that? I could give you a tea right now." "This smells like a troll. Do you understand what boiling is? Where's the water? Do you want to taste dry roasted slugs?" His words were short, cold, and punctuated by fresh emergencies wherever they landed. He came finally to Luna and Amy's table. Their preparations were complete. Ingredients measured and added, and the cauldron was being stirred clockwise. The brew in their pot looked ordinary at a glance. Snape glanced at the brewing schedule and student worksheet beside it. Compared to the neat, correct steps on the blackboard, their notes were odd and free-form, more like spontaneous sketches than a methodical list. Around the cauldron, their jars and vials were arranged with a strange care. If one drew lines between them, they would make patterns like constellations. The boil-curing potion cleared from cloudy to limpid, and a small puff of pink smoke rose. Amy Carr lifted the cauldron away from the flame. Luna added porcupine quills. They dissolved into sparkling specks, peppering the surface. She traced a line above the broth with her wand, then pinched a little snake fang powder and scattered it evenly. Another pink puff, and the potion brightened further. It wasn't quite like Vizette's brews, but it clearly outperformed most of the classroom. Luna stirred and said, "It seems this is as good as it'll get." Amy glanced at Snape and asked, cautious, "Professor Snape, is this acceptable? Bottle it, label it with your names, and send it to the front." Snape's reply was curt. Amy carried the potion forward. Snape scrutinized Luna. Why didn't you follow the steps on the board? Because I processed the materials differently. Luna's eyes were a little unfocused, as if she had come briefly out of her own world. Vizette handles them more precisely than I do. So you added ritual elements? Snape frowned. Is this Vizette's suggested method? 210. The robe is pure black to hide the blood. Luna tilted her head, searching her memories. I think it's similar to potions. Both are like painting. Maybe I'm not very good at painting yet, but I can make the colors brighter. So I tried to fix it, she went on. Vizette taught me the ritual for the water-making spell, and I thought it might help, so I blended it in. Snape raised an eyebrow. This was your idea? Yes, Luna nodded. I just followed my instincts. If a color looked too pale, I'd add more to make it stand out. When the bell rang, the students streamed from the classroom like they were fleeing. Luna took her time closing her textbooks and straightening her desk, then left with Amy Chang at her side. Snape watched their shadows stretch and disappear, a complicated expression crossing his face. That kind of instinctive approach. He had seen it before, back when he was a student. A girl with red hair and green eyes, lily-like in beauty, who acted on feeling, loved ancient magic, disliked following potion recipes, and yet still won Slughorn's praise. Pain twisted Snape's features. Without warning, he clenched his fist and struck his chest, again and again, dull thuds echoing in the empty room. His nails tore his skin, blood welled on his palm and soaked his robes. It hardly showed, his robes were pure black. Footsteps echoed on the landing as Slytherin students returned to their common room. Snape's gaze hardened. He inspected the darkening blood on his hand, then drew his wand and pressed it to the wound. Green light wrapped his hand as flesh knit back together. "Dirt, be gone," he murmured, flicking his wand and using the cleaning charm he favored to wipe blood from his palm and robes. He picked up a potion bottle from a basket, the label reading Luna Amy Chang. He clicked his tongue. These two siblings. Tsk. Since learning about the Elder Wand, Vizette had become even more attentive in history of magic. Whether he could ever use the knowledge or not, the more he remembered the better. He already had a solid grasp of the subject, but hearing the professor explain it again was never wasted time. The morning had been productive. Besides picking up a new magical idea from Sprout, the odd Rubik's Cube theory, he'd arranged a meeting with Professor McGonagall to begin animagus lessons on Saturday afternoons. On his way to the Great Hall, Vizette made notes on the scouring charm button, listing its shortcomings. The button had too few uses. It reverted to its ladybug form after only about 10 people had used it. The incantation could be too loud and should be quieted. The device needed more versatility. The scouring charm itself was useful, but Vizette's version fixed to the ladybug could only clean the wearer, not clean at will, far from flexible. Descending the stairs, he felt an arm slip over each shoulder. Fred and George Weasley flanked him, peering at his notebook. "Oh, this is a plan to make a magical item, isn't it?" they said in perfect unison. Fred squeezed Vizette's shoulder. "How about it, my dear materials consultant? Need any help? We can definitely assist." "Exactly," George put a hand on his other shoulder. "Want to extend the duration of the scouring charm? We're experts at that." Vizette's interest piqued. "Oh, do you have any good ideas?" George grinned. "Don't be so formal. You don't need to say please to us. We're friends, not Filch. Only Peeves makes Filch say please." He winked. "Where were you last night?" Fred lowered his voice a notch, eyes gleaming. "You disappeared so fast." Vizette blinked. "Last night? You two were out too?" Fred and George exchanged a look, then went on together. "Guess where our common room is? Guess who led Filch away? We were about to say hello to you, and then, poof, you went downstairs. We saw you vanish." "You have to tell us if there's a new secret passage," George added. "We're about to change bases." "Change bases?" Vizette frowned. "Was the old place not big enough? Weren't you happy with it before? You said Filch could never find it." Fred waved a hand. "Times change, my dear materials consultant. Thanks to the goodies you brought back from Sweden, we're absolutely bursting with inspiration," George said. "The current base is too small. We need a new one. When we find it, we'll take you to see it." A rough, wheezy meow cut through their chatter. A scrawny, dark gray cat slunk up, eyes like yellow bulbs fixed on the three of them. Madame Norris purred, but there was a human-like warning in her stare. Filch and his cat were inseparable. Madame Norris patrolled for him, and reported every minor infraction. Most students, especially in Gryffindor, loathed them both. The twins sighed in theatrical unison. "Oh, what a killjoy!" Fred scanned the area. "If she's here, Filch can't be far." A shout reached them from the moving staircase. "What are you doing with that thing? Give it to me! That's contraband!" "Looks like someone's being harassed by Filch," George said, shaking his head. "Time for our entrance." "Need any help?" Vizette asked. "Of course not." The twins beamed. George gave a conspiratorial wink. "This is between us and Filch." Fred nodded, grinning. "We actually enjoy it. Combine work and rest like that." Harry, Ron, and Hermione, having just finished Transfiguration, came up onto the moving staircase. Ahead of them, the Weasley twins strode off with their arms around each other, and Vizette squeezed between them. "How long have they been?" Ron flailed a hand, sounding half indignant. "Putting their arms around my shoulders. Who's their real younger brother, then?" "You are, of course," Harry said at once, backing his friend. "You're definitely the little brother." "Thanks, Harry." Ron scratched his head. "Even if you say that, why does it feel so awkward?" Fred and George ran on, and Vizette continued down the stairs. Hermione hurried after him and called, "Vizette, what did Professor McGonagall say in Transfiguration today?" Vizette stopped and thought for a moment. "I asked her a few things." "Why?" Hermione bit her lip, about to press further, then changed tack. "I overheard Justin and the others this morning saying you shared some Transfiguration tips. Could you tell me too?" "Of course." Vizette nodded. "It wasn't a secret technique, just a little insight." He outlined what he'd mentioned earlier, combined with ideas from McGonagall's class. Hermione's grounding in Transfiguration was already good. As Vizette spoke, she kept nodding, ideas crowding into her head until things that had been hazy suddenly made sense. "No wonder you're faster than me," she admitted. "I always visualize each step and transform it little by little, so it can be done by going with the flow too." As she spoke, she also felt the distance between her and Vizette, which made her more determined to work harder. Harry and Ron, who had assumed the conversation would be over their heads, found themselves surprised by how much they were learning. "Actually, Professor McGonagall mentioned a few approaches," Vizette said, waving one hand. "The way you described is one of them." "That's the approach in A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration," Hermione added. "The book lays it out like that. Professor McGonagall did say, 'Start careful and patient, then imagine,'" Hermione said, hair loose and slightly messy from the staircase rush. "I remembered that." "But I think your way's easier," Harry said. "It's a little trick for lazy people," Vizette smiled. "They always tell me to balance work and rest, so I sneak in a short break." "You still need a solid foundation," Hermione pointed out. "Rigor in the basics means fewer corrections later." "That's in the book too," Vizette agreed. "Incomplete transfiguration is difficult to correct, but you must still attempt it." Vizette slipped his notebook into his pocket and waved them on. As they watched him go, Harry's mouth hung open. He remembered Vizette from the library last year, and he muttered, "He calls that balancing work and rest? That's too magical." "Wake up, we're wizards," Ron said, waving a hand in front of Harry's face. "He's not wrong. Work, studying one subject, and rest switching to another, that's balancing," Ron went on. "You sure you hadn't thought of that?" Harry's eyes widened. "Balancing work and rest like that? Really?" Hermione, listening, murmured, "Ron, that actually makes a lot of sense." She nodded gravely. "Are you sure you believe it?" Ron asked, cocking an eyebrow. Hermione only nodded more seriously. After a half-day of classes, coming up from the chilly dungeons into the warmth of the Great Hall, Luna felt her cheeks flush. She paused at the Ravenclaw table for a moment before Amy pulled her to a seat. Luna propped herself on the bench, gently swinging her legs, eyes unfocused as if watching something beyond the room. Amy followed her gaze to a group of fifth-year Ravenclaws hunched over heavily annotated textbooks, brows furrowed. "Luna, are you watching them revise?" "I'm watching the blibbering humdingers," Luna said softly, dreamily. "They make people anxious. They're trouble." "They could use a blibbering humdinger siphon," Amy said. "It drives them away and leaves a calm area. Then they wouldn't look so worried." "Blibbering humdingers?" Amy's forehead creased in confusion. She squinted at Luna's earrings. "What are your earrings made of? They look like tiny carrots." Luna blinked, as if returning from somewhere else. She touched one earlobe and lifted the earring. Dirigible plums, she said. They help you accept the unusual. Want to try one? Dirigible plums? Amy's voice faltered. It doesn't look like crystal. Is it a fruit? Yes. Luna nodded and reached to unhook one. Dad wants to reproduce that diadem, and these would help. You don't have to take it off. Amy hurried to stop her. What diadem? Rowena Ravenclaw's lost diadem, the one on the statue in the common room, Luna explained. It was on her head. You want to copy that with those little carrot things? Amy's eyes widened. That diadem increases wisdom. That's why we need dirigible plums. They're useful, Luna said with complete seriousness. And we must add other things, like… Amy, a little flustered, scanned the hall and then changed tack. That thing on your neck, what is it? A cork? Like from a bottle? Yes. Luna lifted the necklace. It helps keep my mind clear. It actually does that? Amy laughed. Well, that's very magical. Cork usually comes from oak, Vizette said, appearing beside them. Oak's a magical wood, too, used for wand cores, among other things. 212. Snape's harassment flies appear and disappear. Amy looked a little puzzled. Able to make wand casings? Haven't you heard? Vizette imitated Mr. Ollivander's voice, mockingly formal. Oak, unicorn tail hair, 11 inches, extremely rigid. He glanced at Luna and winked. How was that? Did I do him justice? I don't know. Luna shook her head and smiled faintly. My wand was chosen by you. I never heard Mr. Ollivander say anything at all. Amy frowned and thought for a moment. I think I did wave an oak wand, but he said it wasn't right for me, so he tried another one. Vizette explained. Because Ollivander loves wands so much, he tries every combination to find the right match. It's a mutual selection. Mr. Ollivander likes oak, Amy said. Owners of oak wands often have good intuition and an affinity for animals and plants. Is that so? Amy sounded impressed. You're Vizette Lovegood, right? I'm Amy Miller. Nice to meet you, Miss Miller, Vizette said with a nod. Amy brightened. Miss Crivet told me you led Ravenclaw to the Quidditch trophy last year. My parents were Ravenclaws too, Vizette replied. They'd always talk about the trophy. The emblem is an eagle, and they'd never quite stopped wishing Ravenclaw had one. He glanced across the long table toward Cho Chang and Penelope, who were laughing together. Noticing his look, they both gave him a thumbs up, gestured playfully, then covered their mouths to hide their laughter. All right, Vizette cleared his throat. I just played the captain's tactics. It was everyone's hard work. How were morning classes? He asked, as he and Luna walked back toward the Ravenclaw common room. Luna thought for a moment, then said softly, Professor Snape is very serious, and his voice is… special. Special? Yes, a special voice, like it's telling stories, the sort of unique stories, Luna nodded. Father reads me from the tales of Beetle the Bard, The Fountain of Fair Fortune, The Wizard and the Hopping Pot, The Tale of the Three Brothers, Babbity Rabbity and her cackling stump. He reads them all, but he always leaves out one story on purpose. Vizette, familiar with the collection, immediately guessed. The one he leaves out is the Warlock's Hairy Heart? Compared to the other tales, the Warlock's Hairy Heart is grim, closer to the old Brothers Grimm stories. It tells of a handsome, wealthy, clever warlock who refuses to be governed by love. He uses dark arts to remove his heart and imprison it, becoming cold and unfeeling, even indifferent to his parents' deaths. Mocked by servants and meant to prove he can love, he proposes to a witch and takes her to see his imprisoned heart. To convince her he can love, he puts the heart back, but dark magic has warped it. It becomes violent and uncontrollable. In madness, he kills the witch, rips out her living heart, and then opens his own chest to retrieve his hairy heart. He dies holding two hearts, unable to complete the final transplant. It's a chilling story. No wonder Xenophilius leaves it out. I snuck a read of that one. Luna lowered her voice conspiratorially. Father never knew. If Professor Snape told that story and used certain magic to preserve his voice, Luna's eyes brightened. Professor Snape's voice would be perfect for it. Vizette nodded. He had to admit Snape's deep voice suited such dark tales. In History of Magic Today, Professor Binns mentioned an organization called the Wizarding Wireless Network, WN. WN started during the war, Luna explained. Wizards created a radio-like magic to resist the warlocks. After peace returned, WWN dropped the secrecy and opened to all of England. You could listen with a magical radio. Anthony had a magical radio and would take it out on weekends to listen to a band called the Weird Sisters. They were a famous group. Oddly enough, despite the name, all the members were male. WWN, father and mother used to listen to Magic Hour, Luna said with a small sigh. Then the radio broke, and father never got a new one. She exhaled softly. Maybe Professor Snape could work at WWN and be a brilliant radio host. Vizette hesitated. He wouldn't give up teaching at Hogwarts, would he? I don't know, Luna said with a shrug. I think he likes potions, but he doesn't too. How do you mean? Like strong liquor, she said, searching for the right image. You need it to sleep, but you have to endure the pain afterward. Vizette began to understand. Professor Snape's steps in making potions are different from the textbook. Yes, Luna agreed. Compared to the textbook, his steps are better. He optimizes the whole brewing process. Would he be willing to write a new textbook? Luna asked. You said he's a master of potions. He's not willing. Vizette shook his head. I wondered about that once and asked him. He refused. He thought back to a private lesson on the weekend before Halloween. He hadn't yet fully grasped Snape's ways, and the lesson had ended early because questions were pressed where silence was expected. Snape was willing to share. If you did as he asked fewer questions, and did more work yourself. A faraway look came into Luna's eyes. Professor Snape's rackspurts appear and disappear. When he lectures, the rackspurts come out. When he stops to patrol the classroom, the rackspurts fly away. Vizette asked tentatively, can you still see rackspurts when points are being taken away? Not a single one, Luna said after a moment's thought, shaking her head. But around those students, there will be many, many rackspurts. It was afternoon, and the class bell had already rung once. Anthony tapped the table impatiently. The bell's gone, and there are only... He swept his hand around the partly empty classroom. Only a few people have shown up. Neville, where's Harry? I don't know. I haven't seen him since noon, Neville shrugged. He's probably with Ron and Hermione. None of them are here. Didn't the girls say they were going to get Gilderoy Lockhart's autograph? Michael yawned. Maybe they ran into him and are all late together. Chris pointed to the walls. There are still a lot of people. Look, all those portraits are of Gilderoy Lockhart, and every single one moves. As with many professors, the classroom was decorated to reflect its occupants' interests. The potions classroom had its jars of specimens, the greenhouse its plants. Lockhart had covered his walls and bookshelves with portraits of himself, all wearing that same dazzling smile. Fortunately, the dragon skeletons still hung from the ceiling, confirming that this portrait gallery-like room was indeed the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. 10? Vizette? I've got an idea. Terry leaned toward Vizette. Why don't you summon Lockhart with a summoning charm? See what he's up to right now. He'd barely finished speaking when a commotion came from the corridor, and Lockhart's voice rang out. Come on, Mr. Creevy, help us take a double photo. Very good, we'll all sign for you. Harry, smile. A group of girls streamed into the room, followed by a flushed Harry, then Hermione and Ron. Finally, Lockhart himself swept in, resplendent in an aquamarine robe trimmed with shimmering silver tassels. With every step toward the lectern, the tassels flashed and swayed, drawing the eye. I, Gilderoy Lockhart, he announced. The portraits all turned toward him in unison. Order of Merlin, 3rd class. The framed Lockharts broke into applause. Honorary member of the Dark Arts Defense League, 5-time winner of Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award. He beamed and rattled off his accomplishments as if they were family heirlooms. The girls clustered at the foot of the podium, applauded wildly. Vizette barely raised an eyebrow. She had seen Witch Weekly before. An entertainment magazine aimed mostly at witches, full of romance advice, recipes, horoscopes, and celebrity gossip. It was the sort of thing Weasley might use in the kitchen for a recipe. Winning Most Charming Smile 5 times simply explained Lockhart's popularity. Amid the applause, Lockhart produced a stack of test papers. I'm delighted to see that you've purchased my complete works, he crowed. Now for a simple little test. If you've read my books and actually understood them, you'll do well. Vizette watched him distribute the papers one by one with a puzzled expression. According to the way he described things in Break with a Banshee, Lockhart should be able to levitate a pile of papers across the room. Why bother handing them out manually? Anthony glanced over the questions and muttered in disbelief. What sort of questions are these? Gilderoy Lockhart's favorite color? What do you think is Gilderoy Lockhart's greatest achievement to date? Chris added. Is this a defense against the dark arts test or a fan club questionnaire? Half the lesson passed while Lockhart collected the papers and corrected them aloud. Very good. Remember, my birthday is January 26th. He continued. I've corrected several of these, and no one remembered that I like lilacs. They're the color of forget-me-nots. Very easy to remember. I mentioned it in the Snowman book. While Lockhart pontificated, Wiset's thoughts drifted elsewhere. She found herself missing Professor Quirrell's lessons, wondering how his body was faring now, and how much progress had been made with the Philosopher's Stone. Her roommates felt the same. At least Professor Quirrell would actually teach, Michael grumbled. This Lockhart, does he want us to admire him? I don't like the man. It's Professor Quirrell I miss, Wiset said quietly. Right, Anthony agreed. Give me Quirrell any day over Lockhart. At last, Lockhart finished marking and clapped his hands. Very good. 2 students got full marks. Let me see. Hermione Granger of Gryffindor and Wiset Lovegood of Ravenclaw. 10 points to your houses. Michael stared at Wiset in disbelief. Wiset, you actually got full marks? I can't accept that. The others looked equally incredulous. Wiset answered calmly, I just don't like leaving blanks. I prefer to fill out a whole paper and be as accurate as I can. He's right. This test was simple. If you've read his books, you can find the answers inside, Anthony said. Wiset opened Voyages with Vampires and pointed to the margin notes. There's useful stuff in here. Some of the things he writes do have a basis if you check other academic sources. Chris picked the book up and flipped through it. Are we really looking at the same book? It takes additional reference books to verify the claims, Wiset explained. Some of the theories on handling dark arts creatures, for example, can be cross-checked in more scholarly works. It's just more trouble to do that work. As a Ravenclaw, I can't just skim and be done, Chris said, handing the book back. Anthony and the others leafed through a few pages and asked Wiset for a bibliography so they could read deeper. Lockhart then produced a large iron cage from under a cloth, the bars rattling and a sharp chirping noise coming from within. He placed a hand on the red cover and adopted a suddenly solemn tone. This, class, is defense against the dark arts. You must be prepared not only to resist spells and hexes, but to face terrifying creatures of the dark arts. Keep calm when confronting these dreadful monsters. 214. Ancient Magic, Soul Control Spell. When Lockhart took his stance, the students fell silent. They remembered the creatures from his books and tried to guess what kind of dark arts menace might be hidden beneath the iron cage. Was it something the cage had been enchanted to hold? Yetis, trolls, or something even darker and more dangerous? Lockhart gave his usual smug grin and yanked the cover off. The sight that met them was nothing like their imaginations. A cluster of pixies clung to the bars, shrieking and chattering with bared teeth. Their eyes were entirely black and filled with mischief. Despite their size, their malice was unmistakable. These were Cornish pixies, danger rating XXX, mischievous and destructive in the way of peeves, delighting in pranks and havoc. A few boys couldn't help but laugh at how ridiculous the creatures looked. Lockhart, seeming embarrassed by their laughter, reached for the cage latch. Since you're all so confident, he announced, let's see how you plan to deal with these monsters. He threw the latch open. The pixies spilled out and, delighted to be free, surged toward the students. They were faster than anyone expected, darting through the desks like a wind. Ink bottles were snatched up and hurled, glass shattered, black ink splattered everywhere. The classroom quickly descended into chaos. Vizette raised his wrist and, with a silent, wandless levitation charm, took control of the flying ink bottles. Then he drew his wand and transfigured the bottles into small iron cages, levitating them to chase down the pixies. With Vizette at the center, the nearby Ravenclaws were relatively safe and helped drive pixies into the small cages. The cages were cramped. Once inside, the pixies could not move and couldn't slip free. Gryffindor scrambled too. Seamus and Dean hid under the tables, swinging Lockhart's books as makeshift weapons. Ron and Harry worked together, using books to fend off attackers. Hermione was more ingenious. She froze 2 pixies with a freezing charm and then guided them into the small iron cages Vizette controlled. Realizing Vizette was not to be trifled with, the remaining pixies shifted their attention to Lockhart. They attacked Lockhart and the portraits that bore his likeness just as ferociously, screeching, throwing ink at the canvases, tearing portraits, even pulling at Lockhart's hair. Several pixies latched onto his mane. He winced and struggled. He scrambled wildly for his wand and shouted, "Pesca pixie, pester no me." The spell did nothing. The pixies only laughed sharper, as if mocking him. One distracted Lockhart while another yanked his wand from his hand. Vizette, who had overheard the incantation, repeated it under his breath and felt something familiar in it. His knowledge of household charms told him this sounded like a domestic-level spell, but there was more to it. Pesky, pixie, pester. No. Annoying pixies. "Don't bother me," he mouthed, trying to piece the chant together. The wizard's combat guide in his mind opened on its own, the pages turning as it absorbed ancient magic power. On an otherwise blank page, text began to appear. Ancient magic, soul-bound control charm, channels ancient magic power, refines the imperious-like effect, penetrates the soul, controls living beings. Vizette was surprised. The household charm had somehow become a form of ancient magic, one built on the principles of Imperio. Help me, Neville cried out then. 2 pixies had hooked his ears and were lifting him as though to hang him from the dragon skeleton. The danger snapped Vizette into action. He raised his wand. His Obscurus core pulsed, channeling ancient magic power. The feeling was similar to casting an Imperious-style command, a warm, tingling current from wand tip, but gentler and smoother. The pixies under his influence moved with dexterity rather than the jerkiness of a crude puppetry. Vizette thought, "Please stop where you are." The pixies holding Neville froze, hovering midair and swaying, unable to ascend. Neville yelped, struggling to break free. Vizette flicked his wand. 2 shards of broken glass rose and softened into cushions to catch Neville if he fell. He then gestured and 2 small iron cages darted over to cover the 2 pixies controlled by the soul-bound control charm. Neville landed on the cushions with a shaken, grateful, "Thank you, Vizette." Vizette smiled. "Do me a favor. Let's catch them all. I want to finish class on time." The others rallied around him. With Vizette directing the floating small cages and steadily mastering the soul-bound control charm, the students worked together and corralled the pixies one by one. With a final effort, Vizette steered the small cages toward the big iron cage and dumped the pixies inside. Then he dispelled the transfiguration on the small cages. The objects reverted to ink bottle shards and tinkled to the floor like blooming glass flowers. The students set their desks upright. The class bell rang exactly on time. Harry and Ron, wiping sweat from their brows, called out, "Vizette, your transfiguration was brilliant." Hermione stared at the floating small cages as they settled, her expression complicated. The density of transfiguration spells Vizette had managed made her wonder how long it would take her to reach that level. She suspected Vizette had combined other kinds of magic to make it work. Vizette looked around at the mess and muttered the next spell, Reparo. Torn pages mended, ink stains retreated, and broken glass reassembled, everything except Lockhart's portraits, which still bore the brunt of the pixies' mischief. The students finished straightening up, and the dismissal bell chimed on schedule. Everything, if a little more disordered than before, was back to normal. Pixies were dark creatures that could fly, and their capacity for mischief had caused no small amount of trouble for the students. Yet because they had handled the situation successfully, the pupils left the classroom with a satisfied glow. When the bell rang, they filed out in noisy clusters, still trading stories of their exploits. "I caught a pixie with a softening charm. I locked 2 of them in a cage. I stunned 2. Those books were brilliant. Who used the softening charm just now? I got hit in the knee. Was that you?" Just as Vizette was about to step through the door, a voice came from behind him. "Mr. Lovegood, there's something I'd like to discuss with you." Chris muttered, "Doesn't sound like a good thing." Vizette sighed, turned, and forced a smile. "Professor Lockhart, what can I do for you?" Lockhart glanced at the roommates standing near Vizette, cleared his throat, and announced, "Students, I'd like to speak with Mr. Lovegood alone." "But we have questions too," Michael protested. "You were in Ravenclaw, right? You must understand this feeling." "Oh ho, Of course I understand, Lockhart said, preening. I'm a third-class Order of Merlin recipient. Ask away. He smiled, the practiced Lockhart smile, exactly 8 teeth on display, as though he'd rehearsed every angle. Terry was blunt. You're a famous wizard who has traveled with werewolves. How come you couldn't even deal with those pixies? Lockhart adopted an injured expression, full of theatrical regret. You only saw the surface. You didn't see the deeper truth. He sighed dramatically and shook his head. This chaos today is not a failure of my magic. It was caused by you. Terry jabbed a finger at himself, baffled. Caused by us? You all know pixies come from Cornwall, Lockhart said, pitying them, but you do not know their true nature. I call them monsters. Do you think they are simple magical creatures? They feed on laughter, someone supplied. You must know Davina Formage, right? She was a poor witch. Davina Formage? Michael and the others looked to Vizette for confirmation. Vizette blinked. He hadn't heard the name before. Exactly, Lockhart said, nodding as if he were revealing a crucial lesson. She was a witch from the 17th century. Do you know her story? Vizette shrugged. No. Lockhart launched into it as if he were performing a tragic monologue. Davina Formage was kidnapped by 5 local pixies while she was vacationing in Cornwall. After the Aurors rescued her, she petitioned the ministry every year to exterminate all pixies. How knowledgeable, Lockhart added with a pleased smile, turning his flattery toward Vizette. No wonder Professor Flitwick and the others think so highly of you. He believed, quite sincerely, that flattering Vizette might buy him a connection. He had been watching, charming, networking, always planning. He'd seen Bagshot at Flourish and Blot's beam when Vizette gave her a simple color-changing magic sculpture. He'd watched Vizette come and go from Ollivanders. Connections with Bagshot and the Ollivander family could be very useful, and Lockhart intended to cultivate them through Vizette. He had ambitions, grand and shameless, to polish his reputation at Hogwarts and one day become Minister for Magic. If he could claim victories here, if he could be seen as Harry Potter's professor, that would be a bright stripe on his resume. He pictured himself rising through society, regretting only that the Sorting Hat had almost put him in Slytherin. Perhaps, he thought, he'd have gotten where he wanted sooner with a different house. Still, his winding adventures had granted him a fame he intended to use. Back to the matter at hand. Lockhart clapped, snapping his attention back to the students. 5 pixies were enough to overpower Davina Formage. Do you know why? Because pixies feed on laughter, someone said hesitantly. Precisely, Lockhart crowed. Pixies grow stronger the more they are laughed at. Davina laughed at them, and their power swelled, enough to subdue an adult witch. Terry's face brightened with understanding. So you're saying, we laughed at the pixies today, and that made them harder to deal with? Lockhart reached for the podium and lifted a green-covered book titled Gilderoy Lockhart Teaches You How to Rid Your Home of Pests. Of course, don't despise dark arts creatures, even ones as weak as flobberworms, he said. Have you ever tried to clear out flobberworms? They live in damp ditches, and every year countless witches and wizards need professional help to get rid of them. Why do you think I published this book? Think of the money it saves your mothers in cleaning fees alone. Terry and the others exchanged glances. A little cowed, there was a grain of truth in his bragging. Anthony folded his arms, still skeptical. Then why couldn't you deal with the pixies? He asked. Because of your ridicule, Lockhart replied smoothly. When they're mocked, they feed on it. They collect power from the laughter and the jeers, and that strengthens them against my spells. Think about it. 2 houses were making sport of them. Do you think that didn't give them any advantage? He leaned toward Vizette and patted him on the shoulder. I was rushed earlier and forgot to give you points. Just as Professor Flitwick said, your performance was excellent. I award Ravenclaw 50 points. That kind of largesse made Anthony and the others waver. For a moment, Lockhart didn't seem quite so untrustworthy. He noticed their softened expressions, raised his eyebrows, and flashed his practiced smile. Since you're all so interested, I will personally demonstrate how to deal with pixies. He led them back to the classroom, fumbled with the latch of the large iron cage, and warned in an exaggeratedly solemn tone, ridicule is their strength. Never underestimate them. Seeing his expression, the students fell into earnest silence. Lockhart opened the latch, plunged his hand inside, plucked a single pixie, and snapped the cage shut. The movement was quick and sure. There was a showman's grace to it that matched the gestures in his books. I only need a simple spell to subdue it. He tapped his wand to the pixie's head. Obliviate. The struggling pixie went limp, sagging in Lockhart's hand like a bit of clay. It can't do anything anymore? Anthony and the others leaned forward, wary, and reached out to touch it. The pixie made no response. Only a slight rise and fall of its body showed it was alive. Think it's a pixie now. No, it's a loyal dog. Lockhart tapped the pixie again. Obliviate. This time the creature dropped to all fours, panting and wagging an imaginary tail. It ran stiffly to Lockhart and yelped like a small, overexcited dog. Or a crow loyal to me. Lockhart barked another. Obliviate. The pixie leapt up, used its arms like wings, and held them stiffly outward. Its black eyes gleamed with a sharper intelligence as it flapped and uttered a tight, cawing sound. How about that? Lockhart crowed, eyebrows high and smug. It's now a crow loyal to me. You saw what proper spellcasting can do when done perfectly, he continued, but there are always uncontrollable factors. Remember my book, Wandering with Werewolves? When the werewolf faced the forest troll, how did I help him break free? He looked for affirmation. Anthony and the others glanced at Vizette. Vizette answered, You made the trolls fight each other, opened an escape, and then followed the werewolf wizard out of their encirclement. That was a memory charm? Anthony asked, curious. Isn't that what the book said, that you used a memory charm? Lockhart cut in immediately. The question isn't the charm itself, it's the application of magic. Choosing the right magic at the right time is what matters. You must value every dark arts creature and every kind of magic. Magic can be extended, adapted, which is why you must study it deeply. I trust you Ravenclaws can take lessons from this, yes? No matter what one thought of his acting in class, Lockhart's point was sound. Vizette cleared his throat and asked, Professor Lockhart, could you demonstrate that memory charm again? I didn't see the whole process clearly. Lockhart smiled, then the smile stiffened. Haven't you seen enough? I found it incredible, Vizette said, very serious. I didn't catch the details. Lockhart laughed, a touch forced, and reached back into the cage. He snatched another pixie. Obliviate! Vizette cast a magic eye and watched Lockhart's movements with intense concentration. The pixie's body showed faint patterns, small circular runes like the magical tracery on a golden snitch, though fewer and less interlaced. As Lockhart intoned, a pure silver light bloomed and washed over the pixie, smashing those sigils inside it. The fragments didn't vanish. They writhed and collapsed chaotically within the pixie's flesh. Mr. Lovegood, Lockhart announced to Vizette, what would you like it to become? How about I decide? Become a frog loyal to me. Obliviate. Another flash of silver. This time the light didn't simply crush the circuits. It began to reform them, rearranging the pattern into something else. The new tracery was uneven, jagged in places, not as elegant or whole as the original designs. The pixie half crouched on the table, eyes darting, then puffed its cheeks and let out a small croak. Anthony and the others applauded. Professor Lockhart, you're amazing. After all, I hold the Order of Merlin 3rd class, and I'm a specialist in defense against the dark arts, Lockhart rattled off as fluently as ever. Anything else you wish to see? Professor Lockhart, please, can you turn it back into how a pixie should be? Vizette asked. He wanted to know if Lockhart's memory charm could actually reshape those magic circuits inside the creature. He studied Lockhart with a careful intensity. He wanted to know whether a memory charm could truly remap those inner patterns. Anthony reached out and poked the still croaking pixie with a finger. Professor Lockhart, we'd like to see it too. Noticing Vizette's expression, Lockhart's eyebrows danced even higher. He knew perfectly well that his little demonstration had captured Vizette's attention. He adjusted his hat and assumed an air of importance. Aren't you supposed to be heading to your next class? It should be starting soon. Go on to class. Mr. Lovegood, if you have a moment, do come by my office and I'll demonstrate it again. You know where it is, don't you? Lockhart added, with a practiced smile. Vizette and the others left the classroom. Anthony quickened his pace and stopped in front of Vizette, backwards walking as he gave him an appraising look. Michael, puzzled by Anthony's odd behavior, reached toward Anthony's forehead. What's wrong with you? Were you hit with a memory charm? You don't recognize Vizette? Just a little unfamiliar. Anthony swatted Michael's hand away. It's the first time I've seen Vizette actually leave class on time. When you put it that way, it's true, Chris said thoughtfully. Except for history of magic, he never leaves on time. Exactly, Michael said. Either he stays behind to write reflections, or he pepper the professor with questions. He scratched his head. History of magic ends on time because Professor Binns finishes even earlier than we do. Terry laughed. It's so convenient for Binns, he just sinks back into the wall and appears on the other side. You lot can chatter away, Anthony smiled, though he couldn't resist a jab. So, how was it? Lockhart is more impressive than I expected. Your relative is Newt Scamander, and you know Slughorn. What did you expect? Michael retorted. Terry nodded. Anyway, that memory charm was something else, and some of the theories he mentioned actually made sense. Anthony looked at Vizette. What do you think? Vizette, still savoring the memory of the charm, let out a low groan. Perhaps he's better suited to adventure than to teaching. At least the material in his books is valuable for research, another student offered. We'll see. Come on, Charms is about to start. As Vizette and the others hurried away, Lockhart exhaled a long, satisfied sigh. He produced a small mirror from his pocket and inspected his reflection, smiling triumphantly. An exquisite memory charm, sure to catch his attention. He plucked a comb from his sleeve and meticulously smoothed his hair, preparing for the next Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson. He decided he really didn't need a whole cage of pixies for the demonstration. One carefully managed pixie and a prepared questionnaire would do the trick. Quick, impressive, and charming. Perfect. The bell rang and Lockhart flashed his signature grin, his teeth dazzling. Good afternoon, students. I, Gilderoy Lockhart, Order of Merlin, 3rd class. Later that afternoon, in the headmaster's office at Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore stood by the bird perch, a small box of berries in his hand. He fed Fawkes, whose brilliant red plumes had dulled and whose bright eyes seemed weary. Dumbledore placed a berry carefully into the phoenix's beak. Fawkes craned forward and, with a soft nudge, rubbed Dumbledore's cheek with his beak. He turned his head and blinked slowly toward the desk. All right, Dumbledore said, waving a hand, and the box of berries floated back onto the perch. You're getting on in years, I know. You'll be young again soon. There's no need to push me to hurry. Fawkes spread his wings as if to pat Dumbledore's head. Dumbledore chuckled. Very well, I'll indulge you for a little while. He crossed to his desk, which groaned under stacks of paperwork, letters and petitions from Hogwarts, memoranda from the International Confederation of Wizards, and summons from the Wizengamot, all waiting for his approval. Dumbledore chose a small pile of Hogwarts forms, each stamped with the school crest, the golden H guarded by lion, eagle, badger, and serpent. With a gentle snap of his fingers, a tin of sweets sailed out of a cabinet and into his hand. The wrapper showed a Viking longship charging a mint leaf, Swedish mint licorice, one of his new favorites. Once I've finished these, I'll have to ask Vizette where he got them, he mused, popping one into his mouth. The cool sweetness sent a crisp chill up through his beard, and he inhaled sharply, with a pleased hum. Outside the window, the sky had started to deepen. Inside the office, the Sorting Hat suddenly burst into song with a cracking, strident voice. Its notes tore through the air, hoarse, grating, like fingernails on glass, as the hat threw itself into its own performance. Fawkes, roused from a nap, shed a few dull feathers. They did not drift to the floor, but smoldered in midair, turning to ash before they could fall. Hogwarts under the moonlight, magic is calling. Facing the bottomless black lake, we must bravely swim across it. The hat cried, its tip bobbing as if gasping for breath. Albus, how do those two lines sound? I've been mulling them over for days. Dumbledore set down his quill and regarded the hat thoughtfully. He tapped his fingers on the desk and then softly repeated the lines, humming them in a country music lilt. The lyrics are very good, he admitted slowly, though I'm not used to this style of, performance. I do like the lines. Very much. That's wonderful, the Sorting Hat replied, ecstatic at the compliment. But your singing is far too comfortable. It doesn't quite fit these verses. 218. Dumbledore's Considerations. The Sorting Hat mulled the matter aloud. Death metal, It has many striking elements, but it's hardly suitable for the start of term song. So I borrowed the ideas of battle and courage instead. It seems to have worked well. Ah, no, that won't do. That's far too Gryffindor. As a sorting hat, I mustn't sound like that. The tip of the hat wriggled as if chuckling. I must think again. Albus, have you arranged the band? The band? Dumbledore reached for another parchment to sign. I'm planning to invite the Weird Sisters. They are very popular with the students, and their style is somewhat appropriate. What do you think? I trust your judgment. The hat trembled, amused. I'll turn the lyrics over in my mind a little more. Silence fell. The only sound in the headmaster's office was the scratch of a quill across paper. Evening darkened the windows. A polite knock broke the quiet. Come in. Dumbledore waved his wand, and the high piles of documents rearranged themselves into neat stacks. Professor McGonagall stood in the doorway in her usual dark green robes. Only a small handful of papers remained on Dumbledore's desk. Minerva, good evening. Albus. McGonagall stepped forward and handed him an envelope stamped with crossed wands in blue. It's unusual to receive a letter at this hour. Dumbledore accepted it, but did not open it. He set it aside. This is this year's list of proposed collaborations for Hogwarts. He pushed the rest of the papers toward her. The old rule still stands. Review them, and then submit them to the school board. McGonagall skimmed the stack, a slight frown appearing. Professor Lockhart's books are quite expensive. The standard bursaries will not cover them. Dumbledore rubbed the back of his neck, turning his head thoughtfully. I know that, which is why I applied for an additional bursary. The board should approve it. He tapped the desk with a finger. Minerva, I've been rather preoccupied lately. What is your opinion of Professor Lockhart? A tea service appeared between them, and a plate of brightly colored macarons settled beside it. McGonagall's mouth tightened as she looked at the steaming red tea. My opinion hasn't changed since before term began, she said slowly. The defense against the dark arts post is not really suited to him. Professor Snape sent his regards, Dumbledore remarked, taking a macaron. He asked why he wasn't chosen. He asks that every year, Dumbledore said with a small smile as he bit into the pastry. I almost missed hearing that this year. It felt strange. McGonagall's tone remained dry. Apart from the disastrous first lesson, he has, oddly enough, continued to surprise the students. But, she glanced again at the papers. Albus, you haven't heard about the trouble he caused this afternoon? Fred and George, the Weasley twins? Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. They blew open the big iron cage and the pixies flew free. McGonagall's lips quirked despite herself. The pixies made off with Lockhart's wand, and she broke off with a short, sharp cough and the slightest hint of a smile. He found himself pointing the wand at rather unfortunate targets. It was most undignified. She coughed again. Poppy healed the injuries in a trice. Perhaps a restorative tonic would do him some good, Dumbledore suggested lightly, but his eyes were amused. Undignified indeed, McGonagall said, regaining her composure. With Fred and George's abilities and their connections with Hufflepuff, I fear this tale will circulate the school by tomorrow. Her expression grew more serious. Albus, these past 2 years, and particularly the issue of this year's Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, you've got to understand my concern. Is you-know-who's curse real? Dumbledore's face sobered. That I cannot confirm. To this day, I cannot say for certain whether Lord Voldemort is truly gone. What is certain, McGonagall said, is that the Defense Against the Dark Arts post is cursed, in a manner of speaking. We have to find a new professor every year. Even I find it difficult to place someone properly. During the years we fought Voldemort, we paid a terrible price. There are not many wizards left who can teach this subject. Our choices are limited. McGonagall nodded. I know that all too well. Dumbledore laced his fingers together and leaned forward. Minerva, you should know I am convinced Lord Voldemort will return. Of course, she answered without hesitation. I noticed Quirrell's oddities, Dumbledore went on. The Gringotts break-in confirmed my suspicions. Albania is where Lord Voldemort has been hiding, and Quirrell happened to travel there. Rather than turn Quirrell away, it seemed preferable to keep him where I can observe him, and if possible, to try to help him. A target is better than no target. He paused, his fingers clasped tightly. I must admit, if it had not been for Vizette's assistance in uncovering Quirrell's other side, things might have gone differently. After a beat, Dumbledore shifted to another topic. As for Lockhart, despite his theatricality, some of the material in his books is useful. He waved his wand, and a copy of Wandering with Werewolves fluttered up to the desk. Dumbledore opened it. The margins were full of neat annotations. Minerva, have you read this? There's some genuinely interesting content. I visited Professor Marlowe F. Fang once on a particular matter. He is an authority on lycanthropy, McGonagall said, adjusting her spectacles. I accompanied him to Armenia. Fang told me he had found subtle signs that a wizard in Armenia might possess a way to free werewolves from their fate, Dumbledore said, turning the book to a bookmarked page and sliding it toward her. McGonagall's eyes arrested on the heading. Human form restoration spell, she read aloud. Dumbledore nodded. There is such a charm. It can temporarily blunt the change, making the transformation easier to manage, though its effects are short-lived. That is astonishing, McGonagall murmured. It is an exceedingly rare and difficult magic, Dumbledore continued. For various reasons, it has nearly been lost to us, known to only a handful. Still, any fragment of knowledge that might lessen suffering is worth preserving. 219. Like a Thunderbird. This is an extremely niche bit of magic. Professor McGonagall's brows drew together. Professor Lockhart, she flipped to the beginning of Wandering with Werewolves. Is it also Armenia? Could this story really be? Dumbledore shrugged helplessly. As far as I can tell, yes. Gilderoy Lockhart should be sent to Azkaban. McGonagall's eyebrows shot up and her voice hardened. But we can't do that. Dumbledore shrugged. That Armenian wizard lost his memory. He waved his wand and summoned Lockhart's other books. McGonagall watched in disbelief. Albus, do you mean? Exactly, Dumbledore nodded. Most of the adventures in these books involve real people. I tried to find 2 of those participants, he added. They'd also lost their memories. I even tried restoring them myself and found it very difficult. Can't we do anything? McGonagall pressed. Dumbledore exhaled, waved his wand, and returned the books to their shelves. He smiled in that secretive way of his and looked toward the box of peppermint licorice. At least not for now. Time will tell. McGonagall collected herself, smoothing her expression. Is that why you let Lockhart stay at the school? Dumbledore nodded. If people can put aside their prejudices and look past Lockhart's persona, they'll find what they need in the books. Lockhart being at Hogwarts lets students interact with him, learn to distinguish truth from falsehood, and to challenge authority, McGonagall said. In that, Ravenclaw has been doing well. She rubbed her brow. I noticed these past few days they've begun studying those books. That doesn't surprise me. Dumbledore nodded, pleased. I hope Harry can see another point. Oh, right? McGonagall's face brightened as she remembered. What you mentioned at the end of last term starts this weekend. Dumbledore's interest lifted. Transfiguration, animagus work, a fascinating ancient ritual. I wonder how much he can learn. He has a real gift for transfiguration. His first transfiguration lessons surprised me. McGonagall adjusted her glasses, a hint of satisfaction at her mouth. Dumbledore murmured, and he used transfiguration in Professor Lockhart's first Defense Against the Dark Arts class, didn't he? On quite a large scale. The Gryffindors have all wanted to learn how to transfigure themselves into iron cages after that. McGonagall sounded a little helpless. I've never seen them so eager. They're learning that transfiguration much faster than usual. Once they completed the spell, they'd compare results, whose iron cage looked better, whose matched Vizette's more closely. It seems Vizette, in that class at least, used only transfiguration. Dumbledore smiled. His eyes narrowed with satisfaction. He left unsaid the rest. If Vizette had wanted to deal with those house elves privately, there were easier methods than involving the students. But he had chosen to call everyone together, to face the problem together, and by doing so, he prevented the house elves from causing further harm. Perhaps that was the difference between Ravenclaw and Gryffindor, Dumbledore thought. Minerva, do you know about a North American magical creature? He asked, lifting his teacup. They have a good relationship with Muggles and are even revered by the indigenous peoples. Of course, McGonagall nodded. The Thunderbird. Newt would know more about it than I would. Dumbledore coughed lightly and returned to the subject. When thunderbirds soar, they often bring rain. In Arizona, that rainfall is vital, so they are especially revered. And they don't only bring rain. Thunderbirds can also summon lightning. You should see it. The lightning they release is beautiful, quite a sight. If only it were a lion, McGonagall said with a faint, rueful note. That would have been even better. Dumbledore smiled and shook his head. The two Gryffindors fell silent for a moment. If this continues as it has, McGonagall sighed and reopened the conversation, we'll need a new professor next year. If there's no suitable candidate, could we ask the Ministry for help? Perhaps request an Auror. That would be difficult. Dumbledore rubbed his brow. For now, Minister Fudge doesn't seem to trust me. McGonagall's eyes sharpened. Because of the Wizengamot before the summer recess? You were pushing the Muggle Protection Act. Perhaps, Dumbledore said, mildly helpless. Fudge is very close to the old pureblood families. That decree would have embarrassed them. But given my position as Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, they couldn't refuse outright. Instead, they had the drafters of the decree scrutinized, looking for substantive complaints. No wonder Arthur brought a number of ministry officials to search Hogwarts over the summer, McGonagall realized. They were trying to intimidate me. Dumbledore's smile showed he was not overly troubled. I have plenty to worry about every day. I haven't the time to be vexed by such things. Cornelius Fudge can't see that far, McGonagall said with a sigh. He simply can't. It doesn't matter, Dumbledore said, picking up a macaron. As long as the wizarding world is peaceful, that's all I have ever wanted. The path forward must be walked by others, but it cannot be me. All I can do is give him time, guidance, and help. McGonagall regarded him with a mixture of emotions, unsure what to say. They had worked together for so long. They had walked through Hogsmeade together many times and passed the Hogshead Inn. She understood, in ways small and large, why he would say such a thing. Ravenclaw's first herbology class was on Thursday. It was combined with Slytherin and took 2 consecutive periods. On the huge workbench in Greenhouse 3, young mandrakes were already laid out. Beneath the bench, brand new, oversized flower pots waited. Professor Sprout clapped her hands and smiled kindly at the students. You've been waiting long enough. I'm sure you've heard from many what we plan to do today. Even so, I still need to ask a question. She held up a flower pot with both hands. Can anyone tell me the characteristics of a mandrake? Mandy Brocklehurst of Ravenclaw raised her hand. Miss Brocklehurst. Mandy stood. The root of a mandrake is a powerful restorative. Many difficult restorative potions rely on it as a primary ingredient. But the mandrake's restorative properties are matched by its danger. When the root is pulled from the soil, it will emit a cry loud enough to be fatal, so extreme caution is necessary. Mandrakes are also found in the wild and have a degree of mobility. Both wizards and some muggles have knowledge of them. Sprout applauded. A very comprehensive answer. 10 points to Ravenclaw. From the Slytherin table, Pansy added, they're also used in ritual magic, sometimes even in dark arts rituals. Surprising. Sprout's smile never faded as she cut Pansy off before she could finish. An excellent addition, 15 points to both Ravenclaw and Slytherin. That's right, Sprout continued. Mandrakes are materials for ritual magics, but today our work will focus on their use in potion making. You may note these extra details. She pulled open a large annotated parchment scroll with an image of a mandrake. A few key points I hope you'll remember. She tapped the parchment. Young mandrakes make sounds too, but their cries are not fatal, only strong enough to make you faint. Be very careful. She waved her wand and explained repotting technique and safety while pointing to the notes on the scroll. Mandrake planting times vary, so repotting schedules vary as well. This combined course would spend 1 period repotting the seedlings and the next on caring for them. Sprout was a cautious professor. As she had the students retrieve their earmuffs, she kept reminding them, be sure to wear your earmuffs properly so they protect you fully. Although these mandrakes are still seedlings, you are still young wizards. If you hear a mandrake's cry, long fainting spells are unavoidable. She slid her wand into her pocket, picked up an ugly, fluffy pink pair of earmuffs, and demonstrated how to wear them properly. Seeing the demonstration, The other students breathed a sigh of relief and put on their earmuffs in order. Sprout pinched the green-purple leaves of the nearest mandrake, wiggled them gently in all directions, then suddenly gripped and pulled. The mandrake's root was oddly shaped, like a wrinkled newborn, its pale green skin mottled, a little hole at its mouth opening and closing as if it were crying. Because everyone had earmuffs on, they only saw the motions and heard nothing. Sprout held the plant high, wiggled it, picked up a pot from under the bench, took a small trowel, dug a hole, and set the mandrake into its new home. Only after she added fertilizer did the tiny plant stop trembling and settle into calm. After the demonstration, it was the students' turn. Compared with Sprout's practiced ease, most of them struggled at first. Mandrakes not only look like small humans, but can fight like infants. Pulling them from soil takes time and effort. Once in the warm greenhouse and exposed to light, the seedlings did not want to be put back in pots and twisted and writhed to stay free. They not only opened their mouths to cry, but slapped students' heads with their root-like hands and feet. Draco fared poorly at this stage. He had tried to pinch the mandrake to control its roots and shove it into the new pot, but the plant seized the chance to bite his finger. After several years of teaching, Sprout was used to incidents like this. She flicked her wand, and the mandrake released him at once. Vizette also met trouble when he pulled his mandrake from its pot. Faced with a struggling, restless seedling, he quietly cast the basic cultivation charm. Under the calming influence of the ancient magic, the mandrake stopped fighting and screaming almost immediately. It gave a long yawn, used its roots as a pillow, rested its head on its side, and shortly began to snore, a dusty snot bubble at its mouth. Michael had nearly been bitten himself. Seeing Vizette's peacefully sleeping mandrake made him look at his own with sudden apprehension. Still, he knew how valuable mandrakes were. This was a magical plant that must be repotted by hand. With everyone wearing earmuffs and unable to hear each other, the students continued wrestling with their plants in silence. With the basic cultivation charm, Vizette's repotting went smoothly. He took a new pot, dug the soil, and placed the mandrake in the hole. Once in the new pot, though, the seedling began to struggle again, trying desperately to crawl back up and continue soaking in the source of ancient magic it had felt in Vizette's hands. Vizette had a thought and cast the basic composting charm on the fertilizer he intended to use, infusing it so that the ancient magic penetrated the soil. The mandrake's leaves finally calmed. With repotting finished, Vizette turned his full attention to the plant itself. He was naturally curious about a species that could be used in ritual magic and wanted to study it further. He cast his magic eye toward the mandrake, and a different scene opened before him.